Tamerlane is a name that sounds both like admiration and a warning. For some, he is the creator of the great Samarkand, an inspiration for architecture and science, while for others, he is a destroyer of empires, a man who brought terror to an entire continent. He built palaces and roads, but he also ordered towers to be built from human skulls. So, who was he really? A bloody tyrant or a cold-blooded strategist for whom fear was just a tool of power? My name is Semyon. Welcome to the History Show channel. In our new segment, Myths and Reality, today we'll try to figure out where legends end and history begins. I won't retell Timur's biography. I'm not interested in listing conquests or executions, but rather in the logic behind the actions of a man whose name became a symbol of power and fear, and where the line is drawn between the politics of intimidation and senseless cruelty. We will look at the era in which he lived, at the enemies he fought against, and at the cities he sometimes wiped off the face of the earth and sometimes rebuilt from scratch. Let's go. Legend and reality. Timur was born in 1336 in Mavaranar into a noble but non-ruling family. He did not belong to the descendants of Chinggis Khan and therefore could not claim the title of Khan. This fact determined his entire future career. He had to pave his way to power not by birth but by personal abilities. From a young age, Timur stood out for his discipline, endurance, and leadership. He quickly saw that amid constant infighting, true power came from the ability to organize and lead. Around him, a circle of nukers, loyal warriors formed with whom he went through his first campaigns and trials. In one of the skirmishes, Timur received a serious injury. His right arm and leg were left damaged forever. This earned him the nickname Tamerlane, the Iron Lame, which in Western historiography transformed into the more familiar name Tamerlane. Later on, this physical disability became part of his image. A lame but unbroken warrior who flawlessly commands his troops and personally leads them into battle made the subtitles. Gradually, from the leader of a small detachment, he became the ruler who united Mavaranar. Officially, power was with Chinggis Khan's descendants, but he actually held control himself. Timur skillfully combined cruelty with calculation, showing that he was ready to use force when necessary, but could be generous if it was beneficial. Thus, even during his lifetime, an image emerged of a man who rose from the turmoil of the times and managed to impose order on the surrounding world. This image, based on real character traits and actions, became the foundation of the future legend of Tamerlane, a man capable of subduing chaos with the strength of his own will. The perceptions of Tamerlane's cruelty were shaped not so much by facts as by how his contemporaries described them. The sources that have come down to us are contradictory and often reflect the author's attitude toward Timur himself. The most well-known accounts can be roughly divided into three categories: hostile, official, and neutral. Let's briefly look at them. Sources on his cruelty. Ibn Arab Shah, an Arab historian from Damascus, was 12 years old when he experienced the capture of the city in 1401, so he saw him as the embodiment of destruction. He devoted a whole work to Tamerlane, writing with clear personal hostility. Timur is shown as a mad tyrant, destroyer of peoples, and enemy of peace. This source is filled with emotion, and that is precisely why it requires careful handling. The opposite point of view is represented by court chroniclers, primarily Sharaf I Ali Yazdi, the author of the monumental work Zafarnameh, the Book of Victories. He portrays Timur as a bearer of justice and order, a devout Muslim who strictly observes Sharia, a patron, a builder of mosques, and a benefactor. Yazdi stresses that Timur's cruelty is not random but a response to rebellion and disobedience. In his descriptions, even mass executions are presented as inevitable acts of state reason. Between these two extremes are more dry accounts, like the Chronicle of Ghiyas I Ali, which mention the scale of destruction and the loss of cities, without moral commentary. Such records make it possible to separate propaganda from fact, and to understand where cruelty really took place, and where its scale was exaggerated. Comparing sources shows that Timur's cruelty was not an invention, but it was also not an exceptional trait of his character. For some, it was a crime. For others, it was a tool. And for the conqueror himself, judging by the official texts of his court, it was part of a system of governance where fear served the same purpose as law. The policy of intimidation and Timur's wars were marked by extraordinary cruelty, but it was rarely an expression of personal vindictiveness. Rather, it was a calculated strategy aimed at suppressing resistance and maintaining order in the conquered lands. Tamerlane understood the psychology of war well. He did not seek endless sieges and street battles that would exhaust his army. Forcing the enemy to surrender without fighting was more effective, and fear achieved this more reliably than any weapon. He routinely used terror in his campaigns to conserve strength. A single execution replaced many battles. Isfahan is the most famous example. After the uprising of the townspeople in 1387, Timur ordered a public massacre. According to chroniclers, about 70,000 people were killed, and their heads were stacked into towers outside the city walls. A few months later, other Persian cities preferred to open their gates without resistance. Similar actions were repeated elsewhere: Urgench, Damascus, and Baghdad. In each case, the goal was the same: to show that disobedience would lead not just to defeat, but to complete destruction. This principle resembled the methods of the Mongol conquests of the 13th century, but Timur turned it into a system. Fear was used as both a tool of discipline and against internal enemies. Timur demanded strict obedience even from his relatives and military commanders, punishing the slightest signs of disobedience. Thus, a unique model of imperial power was formed, based on fear and order, in which the constant presence of troops or bureaucracy was not required. Timur's name itself acted as law. His cruelty was not reckless, but it could not be humane either. It was a cold calculation turned into a system of governance. Timur, as a builder and patron of the arts, Tamerlane's brutal campaigns coexisted with large-scale creation. Under his rule, Samarkand became one of the East's richest and most beautiful cities. After each conquest, Timur ordered not only trophies to be taken, but also craftsmen, architects, calligraphers, jewelers, and engineers. They moved to the capital and built palaces, madrasas, and mosques. Thus, Samarkand became a center of an artificially assembled elite, a concentration of talents who worked to strengthen imperial greatness. The best-known structures from this period are the Bibi Kanim Mosque, funded with wealth from India, and the Gure Amir Mausoleum, which became the burial site for Timur and his descendants. In addition to architecture, the applied arts developed: stone carving, ornamental mosaics, painting, and decorative calligraphy. For Timur, construction was not only an expression of piety, but also a political statement. Each new palace or mosque demonstrated the strength and stability of the state. Samarkand was meant to embody the idea of order, as opposed to the chaos of conquests. During his reign, science and education flourished. Timur supported astronomers, doctors, mathematicians, and funded religious schools. This became the foundation for the cultural revival that would later be called the Timurid Renaissance. The Age of Cruelty. To understand the nature of Tamerlane's conquests, it's important to see him not as an exception, but as a part of his era. In the late 14th and early 15th centuries, violence was viewed as a natural aspect of politics across the old world. Cruelty was justified and seen as a sign of a ruler's strength. In the same decades when Timur was building his empire in Central Asia, Europe was going through the 100 Years' War between England and France. The population was destroyed along with the crops, and prisoners, especially commoners, were executed without hesitation. In Eastern Europe, wars were being fought by Polish, Lithuanian, and Hungarian rulers against the Horde Khans. And in these conflicts, mass executions were also common in the Middle East. The Mamluk Sultanate was no less harsh than Timur. Egyptian and Syrian sultans suppressed uprisings with the same scale. Beheaded rebels were displayed in the squares, and cities that resisted were plundered. At the same time, in Asia Minor, the Ottoman state was growing stronger under the rule of Bayezid IV. His nickname, the Thunderbolt, reflected not only the speed of his campaigns, but also the decisiveness of his punishments. Ottoman sources directly state that after capturing cities, opponents were subjected to mass executions, just as Timur did. Even in China, where the Ming dynasty ruled, power was accompanied by bloody purges. Emperor Hongwu dealt with his opponents by the thousands, staging public executions of officials and military officers. In this context, Timur's actions do not seem unique. He followed the laws of his time when politics relied on fear and mercy was seen as weakness. The only difference was in scale and efficiency. Timur brought methods of intimidation to a systematic level. He didn't just punish, but turned executions into a tool of governance and propaganda. In addition, he was part of a tradition inherited from the Mongol school of warfare. Moreover, his rule was accompanied by bloody purges. His personality sparked varied reactions among his contemporaries. To Eastern Muslims, he was both a punishment for sins and a sword of faith. To Europe's Christian rulers, he was a threat, but also a possible ally against the Ottomans. The Byzantines and the French, after the defeat of Bayezid, even sent an embassy to Timur to thank him, seeing him as a savior from Turkish expansion. Thus, Tamerlane was not an exception to the norm. He was its concentrated expression. His era did not know the concept of humanity in the modern sense. A conqueror was measured not by the number of victims, but by the scale of power he was able to establish. And in this regard, Timur was one of the most successful rulers of his time. The legacy and curse of Timur. The death of Tamerlane in February 1405 became a symbolic finale of an era built on fear and discipline. He died while preparing for a new campaign against China, without having completed any of his grand plans. His empire collapsed almost immediately after his death, but the influence it had on the East turned out to be much more enduring. The Timurid Renaissance became Timur's main legacy. The craftsmen, artists, and scholars he relocated laid the groundwork for the flourishing of art and science. Under his descendants, especially his grandson Ulugh Beg, Samarkand became one of the centers of astronomy and mathematics in the medieval East. Architecture, miniature painting, poetry, and calligraphy flourished here, shaping Central Asia and Iran's cultural traditions for centuries. But along with the cultural heritage, the shadow of memories of mass destruction and human casualties also remained. For Iran, the Caucasus, and India, the name Timur was long associated not with creation, but with catastrophe. His campaigns caused demographic collapses, devastated cities and trade routes, and even where he built, development relied on forced labor and relocations. A special place in his posthumous history was taken by the legend of Timur's curse. In June 1941, Soviet archaeologists, led by Mikhail Gerasimov, opened his tomb in the Gure Amir Mausoleum in Samarkand. According to reports, there was an inscription carved: "Whoever disturbs my rest will bring disaster upon the world." The day after the opening, on June 22, Germany attacked the Soviet Union. The coincidence was so striking that it quickly became part of popular legend. When Timur's remains were reburied in November 1942, according to Muslim rites, and the counteroffensive at Stalingrad began at the front, the legend became complete. Later, historians established that there were no such words on the slab. Only verses from the Quran, traditional for Muslim burials, were inscribed on the tombstone. There is no real evidence for the existence of a curse. The connection between the opening of the tomb and the start of the war was just a coincidence that eventually turned into a myth. Nevertheless, the legend itself showed how strong the image of Timur is in historical memory. Centuries later, his powerful name still contends with the force that creates and destroys. He remained a symbol of power, capable of subduing the world, but unable to preserve his own creation. In conclusion, what can we take away from all of this? Tamerlane went down in history not as a reformer or thinker, but as a man who took the art of conquest to its limit. His strength lay not only in his military talent, but also in his ability to make people submit to the idea of absolute order. He didn't seek destruction for its own sake, but he used unlimited force to achieve his goal. For his contemporaries, he was the embodiment of power, ruthless, rational, and unshakable. For future generations, he became a reminder of the price humanity pays for greatness, his legacy, not only in the ruins of conquered cities and not in the domes of Samarkand, but in memory itself, about the contradiction between reason and cruelty that lies at the heart of any empire. And in our case, an empire held together by fear dies along with the one who created it. That's all from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.